The persistent knocking echoed through Evelyn Miller's modest home like gunshots. At 73, with arthritis gnawing at her joints, she moved toward the door with cautious steps. Through the peephole, she saw two uniformed officers, their badges catching the afternoon light. "Mrs. Miller? Open up. Police." Her weathered hands trembled as she unlocked the door. Behind her, in the shadowed living room, her son Marcus sat motionless in his wheelchair, watching. His muscular frame seemed at odds with his immobility, his military haircut still maintained despite being 3 years removed from service. "Can I help you, officers?" Evelyn's voice quavered slightly. Officer Daniels, the taller one with cold eyes, pushed the door wider. "We've received reports about unusual activity at this address. Mind if we come in and look around?" I don't understand." "What reports?" "Just routine checks, ma'am," Officer Reynolds added, already stepping inside without waiting for permission. His gaze swept the room before landing on Marcus. A smirk formed at the corner of his mouth. "And who's this?" "My son," Evelyn said, moving protectively toward Marcus. "He was injured overseas." Reynolds nodded with mock sympathy. "Thank you for your service, buddy." The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. Marcus remained silent, his dark eyes tracking the officer's movements. To anyone watching, he appeared helpless, dependent. But beneath his loose-fitting shirt, muscles coiled like springs. His fingers gripped the wheelchair's armrests, knuckles whitening slightly, the only visible sign of the rage building within him. "We need to search the premises," Daniels announced, not asked. "We have reason to believe there might be illegal substances on the property." "That's absurd," Evelyn protested. "You need a warrant." "Actually," Reynolds cut in, "we received an anonymous tip. That gives us probable cause." Marcus watched as Officer Daniels began opening drawers in the living room cabinet while Reynolds herded his mother toward the kitchen. The radio on Daniels' shoulder crackled with dispatcher codes and static. "Mom," Marcus called, his voice steady despite the fury building inside him. "It's okay. Let them look." Evelyn glanced back at her son, confusion crossing her face. This wasn't like Marcus, to submit so easily. But something in his eyes made her pause. "Your boy's got sense," Reynolds said, guiding her forward with a hand on her shoulder that was just firm enough to make her wince. "This'll go quicker if you cooperate." Marcus rolled his wheelchair forward slightly, the rubber wheels squeaking against the hardwood floor. "Officers, my mother has a heart condition. Please don't upset her." Daniels snorted. "We'll try to be gentle." He pulled out a small jewelry box from the cabinet and flipped it open. "What's this, Mrs. Miller?" "Quite a collection for someone living on a pension." "Those were my grandmother's," Evelyn protested. "Family heirlooms." "Expensive-looking heirlooms," Reynolds commented, abandoning the kitchen to examine the box. "We'll need to verify these aren't stolen goods." Marcus's jaw tightened. His eyes followed the officer's movements with the precision of someone who had spent years observing targets. Anyone paying attention might have noticed how his gaze lingered on pressure points, vulnerable areas, the throat, the knee joints, the base of the skull. But these officers weren't paying attention. They saw only what they expected to see, an old woman and her disabled son. "Easy marks. You can't just take my mother's jewelry," Marcus said, his tone deceptively calm. "Actually, we can," Daniels replied, pocketing several rings. "Civil asset forfeiture. We suspect these items may be connected to criminal activity." "Based on what evidence?" Marcus asked. Reynolds laughed. "Look at the tough guy in the wheelchair. You a lawyer now?" "No," Marcus replied, his voice dropping an octave. "Not a lawyer." Reynolds bent down, bringing his face uncomfortably close to Marcus's. "Then what exactly are you besides a burden on your poor mother?" The question hung in the air. Marcus remained still, but something flickered in his eyes, a cold calculation that would have alarmed anyone trained to recognize it. His hands relaxed on the armrests, a deliberate action that contradicted the tension radiating from his body. "Please," Evelyn pleaded, "just tell us what you're looking for. We have nothing to hide." Daniels pocketed the rings with a smirk. "Consider this a tax for our protection, Mrs. Miller. Your neighborhood has been experiencing break-ins lately. Would be a shame if something happened to you and your helpless son." Reynolds chuckled, giving Marcus's wheelchair a small kick. "Yeah, who would take care of Mommy if something happened to her?" Evelyn's hands trembled as she watched her mother's rings disappear into the officer's pocket. "Those are all I have left of her." "File a complaint," Daniels said with a dismissive wave. "See where that gets you." The officers exchanged knowing glances before heading toward the door. "We'll be back to check on you," Reynolds called over his shoulder. "Real soon." As the door closed behind them, Evelyn collapsed onto the sofa, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, what are we going to do? Those were your grandmother's rings." For several seconds, Marcus sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the door. Then, without warning, he stood up from the wheelchair. His movements were fluid, powerful, nothing like someone with a disability. He crossed to the window in 3 swift strides, watching as the patrol car pulled away. They never suspected that the man they mocked as crippled had killed more men with his bare hands than they had arrested in their entire careers. What happened next would lead to a story that changed the police force. What would you do if you witnessed someone you love being harassed by those sworn to protect them? Would you reveal your hand too soon, or wait for the perfect moment to strike back? Evelyn Miller had never been one for extravagance. Her 3-bedroom ranch-style home in Pine Grove looked like any other on the block: modest vinyl siding, neatly trimmed hedges, and a small garden of tomatoes and peppers that she tended each morning. Nothing about the exterior suggested that the woman who lived inside had once managed investment portfolios worth millions. At 23, fresh out of business school in 1975, Evelyn had been one of only 4 women hired by Wellington Financial. While her male colleagues networked on golf courses, she stayed late, analyzing market trends and identifying opportunities others missed. By 30, she was managing her own division. By 40, she had quietly amassed a personal fortune that would have allowed her to purchase any home in the county outright. Yet here she was at 73, living in the same house she'd bought when Marcus was born. Her neighbors assumed she survived on Social Security and a small pension. They offered her rides to the grocery store and brought over casseroles during harsh winter months. Evelyn accepted their kindness with genuine gratitude, never revealing that her pension was actually quarterly dividends from a diverse portfolio she still actively managed. "Mom, why don't you move somewhere nicer?" Marcus had asked once, during his brief leave between deployments. "You could afford a place with security, staff to help with the yard work." Evelyn had simply smiled. "This is home. Besides, who would suspect an old lady in a modest house of having anything worth stealing?" That philosophy had served her well until now. The cash hidden throughout her home, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, was her insurance against digital banking failures. The jewelry passed down through generations of Miller women represented not just sentimental value but tangible assets that could be liquidated if necessary. Evelyn believed in being prepared, a trait she'd passed to her son, though his preparation had taken a far different form. In her bedroom closet, behind a false panel, sat a safe containing documents few knew existed: offshore account numbers, property deeds for land in 3 states, and stock certificates for companies that had made her wealthy. Not even Marcus knew the full extent of her holdings. Evelyn had always believed that wealth displayed was wealth endangered. And now, watching her son stand before her, the son who had pretended for years to need that wheelchair, she wondered what other secrets they'd both been keeping. Evelyn's journey to wealth began with tragedy. Her husband, Thomas, a promising structural engineer, died when Marcus was just 2 years old. The construction company's insurance policy paid out $250,000, a substantial sum in 1984. While most widows might have used it to maintain their lifestyle for a few years, Evelyn saw opportunity. She invested half in emerging technology companies that her colleagues at Wellington dismissed as risky. IBM, Microsoft, Apple, names that would later become giants. The other half went into municipal bonds and dividend-paying stocks. She lived frugally on her salary, allowing her investments to compound. When she eventually retired as Vice President of Investment Strategy at age 60, her net worth had quietly grown to 8 figures. Yet her appearance and home told a different story. Her furniture was well maintained but dated. Her car, a 10-year-old Toyota, had over 150,000 miles on it. She clipped coupons and shopped sales. The only hint of luxury was her garden. She splurged on rare heirloom seeds and specialized tools. Financial independence isn't about showing off, she'd often told Marcus during his childhood. It's about having options when others don't. Those words shaped Marcus more than she realized. While other boys his age dreamed of becoming professional athletes or firefighters, Marcus developed an unusual fascination with self-sufficiency. He learned to hunt from a neighbor, to fix engines from library books, to grow food from his mother. By 16, he could survive in the woods for days with just a knife and knowledge. When he joined the military at 18, his commanding officers quickly noticed his exceptional adaptability. What they didn't know was that Marcus had been preparing for hardship his entire life. Evelyn supported his decision, though it terrified her. Each time he deployed, she added another hiding place for emergency cash in her home. Each time he returned, she noticed the growing darkness behind his eyes. After his third tour, something changed. He came home quieter, more watchful. He installed new locks on her doors, security cameras disguised as outdoor lighting fixtures. He taught her code phrases to use on the phone if she ever felt threatened. "Just precautions, Mom," he'd said when she questioned him. "The world's not as safe as people think." She never pressed him about what happened overseas. Some questions were better left unasked, especially when the answers might bring danger to her door. The wheelchair appeared during Marcus's holiday leave. He had returned home with no visible injuries, yet suddenly insisted he needed it. "It's temporary, Mom," he explained vaguely when she questioned him. "Just trust me on this." Evelyn had her doubts. There was no medical reason for it, and sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him standing briefly or shifting his weight in ways that seemed impossible for someone with lower body paralysis. But she respected his decision, assuming he had his reasons. Those reasons became clearer after she mentioned her concerns about local law enforcement. 6 months earlier, Evelyn had noticed unusual patterns in police presence around their neighborhood. Officers questioning neighbors, increased patrols, and strange incidents where her home seemed to be under observation. "They pulled me over 3 times last month," she had told Marcus during their weekly call while he was still overseas. "Different officers each time, but they all asked personal questions about my finances, about you." That conversation changed everything. Within 2 weeks, Marcus had arranged his leave and returned home, in a wheelchair. "I need to see what's happening firsthand," he explained. "People underestimate those they perceive as disabled. They speak freely, thinking we're not a threat." Evelyn adapted to their new reality. She learned to help him maintain his cover, referring to his condition when neighbors visited, asking for assistance with tasks he could easily handle himself. She became part of his facade of vulnerability while he monitored the police activities she had reported. Meanwhile, she took her own precautions. She moved most of her wealth into anonymous trusts and converted significant portions to precious metals stored in private vaults across 3 states. She updated her will, creating contingencies that would activate only under specific circumstances. She memorized phone numbers of attorneys who specialized in unusual situations. Always prepare for the worst while living for the best, her father had taught her during the uncertainty of the Great Depression. Those words guided her still. Little did they know, they had just awakened a sleeping giant. What Evelyn couldn't prepare for was how quickly the corruption would escalate. It began subtly, officers questioning neighbors about the disabled veteran and his elderly mother. Then came the parking tickets when she left her car in perfectly legal spots. Small harassments escalated to random traffic stops where officers asked probing questions about her son. "They're fishing," Marcus had warned her. "Someone's interested in us." "In you, you mean," she'd corrected gently. He hadn't denied it. Last week, she'd noticed Officer Daniels photographing their house from his patrol car. Yesterday, she overheard him at the grocery store, mentioning to the cashier how some people hide their money in their homes because they don't trust banks. Today, they had finally made their move, taking her mother's rings as a test, gauging their reaction, seeing if they would report the theft. Marcus Miller stood at the window, watching the patrol car disappear around the corner. His posture had transformed, shoulders squared, weight balanced perfectly, hands relaxed but ready. Nothing about him suggested disability now. "Sit down, Mom," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made men twice his age follow him into combat. "We need to talk." As he spoke, his mind flashed back to the mountains of Afghanistan, 2014. His 8-man team had been tracking a high-value target through narrow valleys when the ambush came. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions, bullets kicking up dust at their feet. Marcus had reacted instantly, shoving his communications specialist into a rocky crevice while returning fire. "Get down," he had shouted, identifying the primary threat position on a ridge above them. What followed was a 4-hour firefight that military instructors would later use as a case study in small unit tactics. Marcus had maneuvered his men through impossible terrain, flanking enemy positions one by one. When ammunition ran low, he'd retrieved weapons from fallen opponents. When 2 of his men were wounded, he'd carried them both to safety while providing covering fire. The official report credited him with eliminating 11 hostiles personally and coordinating the elimination of 14 others, all without losing a single team member. "Your training," Evelyn said, pulling him back to the present. "It wasn't just regular military, was it?" Marcus shook his head. "No. After my second tour, I was recruited for specialized operations. The kind that don't exist on paper." Another memory surfaced, a windowless room at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. 20 candidates seated at attention while a colonel with no name badge addressed them. "Gentlemen, forget everything you think you know about warfare," the colonel had said. "Where you're going, there are no rules of engagement. No backup. No extraction plans. You will become ghosts." The 6-month training that followed pushed human endurance beyond reasonable limits. Sleep deprivation. Stress positions. Simulated drowning. Pain tolerance exercises. Memory tests under extreme duress. Marcus excelled at all of it. "They taught us to become weapons," he told his mother, his voice matter-of-fact. "Not just to use them." Evelyn studied her son's face, the face she'd known all his life, yet somehow different now. Harder. More weathered. His eyes constantly moving, assessing. The decision to use the wheelchair had come to him during a 14-hour flight home. Marcus had been reviewing everything his mother told him about the police encounters, their questions, their timing, their unusual interest in a seemingly ordinary elderly woman. "They're looking for something," he had realized. Or someone. His mind flashed to Kandahar province, 2016. His team had been tasked with extracting an asset, a local informant whose cover had been compromised. They'd disguised the man as an elderly beggar with a severe limp, hiding him in plain sight as they moved through crowded marketplaces. The Taliban fighters had walked right past him, their eyes dismissing the hunched figure as irrelevant. Invisibility through perceived weakness, his commander had later called it. Now, standing in his mother's living room, Marcus moved with the fluid economy of motion that had been drilled into him through thousands of hours of close-quarters combat training. He checked each window, tested door locks, and swept the room for potential surveillance devices. 3 months ago, I was in Yemen, he told Evelyn, kneeling to examine the baseboards for signs of tampering. Our target was a financier for terrorist operations. We tracked him for weeks, but couldn't get close. He had security everywhere. Marcus paused, finding nothing suspicious, and continued his methodical sweep of the house. Then we noticed his driver had a blind spot. He never paid attention to street vendors with disabilities. So I posed as a legless veteran selling trinkets outside the financier's favorite restaurant. A grim smile crossed his face. He walked right past me 5 times. On the 6th day, he never made it to his car. Evelyn watched her son move through the house with predatory grace. This was not the boy who had played baseball in the backyard or graduated high school with honors in mathematics. This was someone forged in violence, tempered by experiences she could barely imagine. When I got here and saw how these officers operated, Marcus continued, I recognized the pattern. They're targeting vulnerable residents, people unlikely to fight back. The wheelchair made me invisible to them. Just another victim. He stopped at the hallway closet, reaching behind the winter coats to retrieve a small black duffel bag she'd never seen before. What's that? She asked. Insurance. He unzipped it partially, revealing the edge of what appeared to be body armor and several electronic devices. I came prepared. A memory flashed through his mind, standing in a remote training facility as his instructor demonstrated how to disable an opponent using only thumb pressure on specific nerve clusters. The human body has 44 points that can cause immediate incapacitation with minimal force, the instructor had explained. Learn them all. Marcus had not only learned them, he had used them in situations where silence was mandatory and firearms impossible. These officers, Evelyn said hesitantly. How dangerous do you think they are? Not as dangerous as they think they are, Marcus replied. And nowhere near as dangerous as I am. Marcus unzipped the duffel bag fully, revealing its contents, a compact tactical vest, communication equipment, a set of lock picks, and several small devices Evelyn couldn't identify. There were no firearms, he wouldn't risk illegal weapons possession charges, but she recognized that in his hands, conventional weapons were hardly necessary. You've been planning for this, she observed. I plan for everything. He removed a small electronic scanner and began sweeping it methodically around the room. It's why I'm still alive. His mind flashed to the Hindu Kush Mountains, winter 2020. His 4-man team had been compromised, their extraction point overrun by enemy forces. With temperatures dropping below freezing and no backup available, they'd been forced to traverse 60 miles of hostile territory on foot. Adapt, improvise, overcome, he had told his men as they shed unnecessary equipment and plotted their course through mountain passes too treacherous for pursuit. 3 days later, they emerged on the Pakistani border, having evaded multiple search parties and survived an avalanche that claimed 2 enemy vehicles. When they finally reached the extraction point, their commanding officer had simply nodded and said, Miller always finds a way. The scanner in his hand beeped softly near the living room lamp. They've been here before, he said, removing a tiny microphone from the base of the lamp. Recently. Evelyn's face paled. They've been listening to us. Not anymore. He crushed the device between his fingers, then continued scanning. There will be others. As he moved through the house, discovering and destroying 2 more listening devices, Marcus recalled his final official mission. His team had been sent to eliminate a weapons dealer supplying both sides of a regional conflict. The operation had gone perfectly until the extraction, when local military forces unexpectedly appeared at their rendezvous point. In the ensuing firefight, Marcus had taken a bullet that grazed his temple, leaving him momentarily disoriented. His second-in-command, Rodriguez, had dragged him to cover. Stay with me, boss, Rodriguez had urged, applying pressure to the wound. We're not dying in this hellhole. Marcus had recovered quickly, leading his team through a series of evasive maneuvers that became legendary within their unit. That mission had earned him his final commendation, one that existed only in classified files. Found the last one, he said, removing a device from behind a family photo. We're clear for now. He returned to the living room, where Evelyn waited with remarkable composure. She had always been strong, it was from her that he'd learned resilience long before the military taught him combat skills. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Marcus said, his expression hardening, "we prepare to fight back." Marcus worked through the night, transforming Evelyn's modest home into a surveillance stronghold. With practiced hands, he installed microscopic cameras at strategic points, one overlooking the front porch, another monitoring the driveway, two covering the backyard approaches. Each fed into an encrypted server hidden in the attic crawlspace. "These officers will return," he explained to Evelyn as he calibrated a motion sensor. "When they do, we'll have everything recorded." "For what purpose?" she asked, handing him the tools as needed. Their teamwork was seamless, as if they'd done this many times before. "Evidence," Marcus replied. "But also intelligence. Every interaction tells me more about their patterns, their hierarchy, their vulnerabilities." By dawn, the system was operational. Marcus checked each camera feed on a tablet, nodding with satisfaction at the coverage. The final component was a modified doorbell camera that would activate automatically when anyone approached. "Now we wait," he said, returning to his wheelchair as the first light of morning filtered through the blinds. "And we play our roles perfectly." For the next 3 days, Marcus maintained his facade flawlessly. When neighbors visited, he accepted their assistance with practiced gratitude. When the mail carrier came, he struggled convincingly to reach the letters. Even alone with his mother, he rarely broke character, concerned that unexpected visitors might catch him standing. At night, however, he transformed. Once Evelyn retired to bed, Marcus would silently rise from his chair and begin his work. First, he reviewed the day's surveillance footage, studying every vehicle that passed the house more than once. Then he would slip out through the back door, moving through the neighborhood like a ghost. On the 4th night, he tracked Officer Daniels to a local bar on the edge of town. Positioned in a darkened corner of the parking lot, Marcus photographed the officer meeting with 3 other men, 2 in uniform, 1 in an expensive suit. "The food chain," Marcus muttered, capturing clear images of money changing hands. The next night, he followed Officer Reynolds to a storage facility across the county line. Using the skills that had kept him alive in hostile territory, Marcus observed the officer unlocking a unit filled with boxes of electronics, jewelry, and cash. "Asset collection point," he noted in the small recorder hidden in his watch. By day 7, Marcus had mapped the corrupt officer's entire operation. They targeted homes of elderly residents and individuals with disabilities, people unlikely to fight back or be believed if they reported theft. The officers would plant drugs if residents resisted, ensuring any complaints would be dismissed. The surveillance system at Evelyn's house captured 4 drive-by observations during this period. Each time, Marcus played his part, visible through the front window in his wheelchair, apparently watching television or reading. "They're building confidence," he told Evelyn after the 4th pass. "Getting ready to make another move." She nodded, having grown accustomed to her son's operational assessments. "What are we preparing for?" "They'll escalate," Marcus explained, checking the tablet for any new activity outside. "First they took the rings, testing our response. When we didn't report it, they'll assume we're afraid. That makes us perfect targets for something bigger." "The cash," Evelyn realized. "They'll come for the cash they saw." "Yes," Marcus confirmed. "And when they do, we'll be ready." The opportunity came sooner than expected. Just after noon on the 8th day, a patrol car pulled into the driveway. Marcus was alone, Evelyn having gone to her weekly bridge game at the community center. From his position in the living room, Marcus watched Officers Daniels and Reynolds approach the front door through the security feed on his concealed tablet. He quickly assumed his role, positioning his wheelchair at an angle visible from the entry, a book open on his lap. The doorbell rang, activating additional cameras. Marcus waited, counting to 15 before slowly wheeling himself to answer it. "Officers," he greeted them with feigned nervousness. "My mother isn't home right now." That's fine, Daniel said, pushing past him into the house. We actually wanted to talk with you, Mr. Miller. Reynolds followed, closing the door with unnecessary force. Nice place you got here. Must be tough keeping it up with your condition. Marcus tracked both men's movements while maintaining his helpless facade. My mother does most of the work. Speaking of your mother, Daniel said, circling behind Marcus's wheelchair, we've received some concerning reports about her financial activities. Financial activities? Marcus kept his voice neutral, though his senses heightened as Daniels moved to his blind spot, a tactical positioning technique Marcus himself had used countless times. Banking irregularities, Reynolds elaborated, beginning to open drawers in the living room. Large cash withdrawals, unusual patterns. Signs of money laundering. Marcus knew they were fishing, looking for reactions that would confirm their suspicions about cash in the house. He'd anticipated this approach, having observed similar tactics during his surveillance. My mother handles her own finances, he replied. I'm sure there's been some mistake. Daniels gripped the handles of Marcus's wheelchair, spinning him roughly to face the kitchen. Let's take a look around, shall we? For your mother's protection, of course. The officer pushed the wheelchair forward too fast, deliberately making Marcus jostle uncomfortably. Every muscle in Marcus's body wanted to react, to counter the physical control being exerted over him, but he remained committed to his role. Is this really necessary? He asked, allowing a tremor of fear to enter his voice. Reynolds laughed. Look at him shaking. Relax, soldier boy. We're just doing our job. In the kitchen, Daniels parked the wheelchair hard against the table and began opening cabinets. Reynolds joined him, pulling out food containers and checking behind them. Nothing here, Reynolds said, deliberately dropping a ceramic canister that shattered on the floor. Oops. Marcus forced himself to flinch at the noise rather than assess the tactical situation as his training demanded. Every instinct screamed at him to neutralize these threats, but he remained still, documenting their actions through the hidden cameras. You know, Daniel said, leaning down to Marcus's eye level, your mother mentioned something about keeping emergency money around the house. For medical needs. Ring any bells? I don't know anything about that, Marcus replied, his eyes downcast in apparent submission. Reynolds grabbed Marcus's chin, forcing his head up. Look at me when we're talking to you, cripple. Where does she keep it? Marcus allowed his eyes to show fear while his mind catalogued every detail of Reynolds' vulnerable points, the exposed throat, the knee alignment, the weight distribution that would make him easy to topple with the right leverage. I really don't know, Marcus insisted, playing the terrified son perfectly. Let me help you remember, Daniel said, moving to the refrigerator. He pulled out a carton of milk and poured it slowly onto the floor. Cleaning this up will be difficult for someone in your condition. Marcus watched the milk spread across the linoleum, calculating the growing evidence against these officers. Each violation they committed was being recorded from multiple angles. Please, he said, infusing his voice with desperation. My mother will be home soon. Then you better start talking, Reynolds said, pulling open a drawer and dumping its contents, utensils clattering across the floor. Where's the money, hero? Marcus allowed his breathing to quicken, portraying escalating anxiety while his mind remained ice-cold. These men were following a pattern he'd observed in their other targets, destruction first, then escalation to physical intimidation. There's no money here, Marcus insisted, gripping his wheelchair armrests as if bracing himself. Daniels grabbed the wheelchair handles again and pushed Marcus roughly down the hallway toward the bedrooms. Let's see what mommy's hiding in her room, shall we? In Evelyn's bedroom, the officers became more methodical. They checked under the mattress, inside drawers, behind picture frames, all common hiding places for cash. Nothing, Daniels muttered, frustration evident. He turned to Marcus. Your mother told us she keeps cash here. Are you calling her a liar? She never mentioned money to me, Marcus replied, knowing his mother had indeed hidden cash throughout the house, but in places these unimaginative thugs would never think to look. Reynolds approached, looming over the wheelchair. "I'm getting tired of your attitude." Without warning, he slapped Marcus across the face, hard enough to snap his head to the side. The blow would have triggered an immediate counterattack from the real Marcus, but the character he played simply absorbed the hit with a shocked gasp. "Feel like talking now?" Reynolds asked, hand raised for another strike. Marcus tasted blood inside his cheek. He'd endured far worse during interrogation resistance training, but maintaining his cover while being struck required extraordinary discipline. "I swear, I don't know," he said, his voice shaking, a calculated performance. Daniels pulled Reynolds back. "Easy. We don't want marks. Besides, I think our friend here is telling the truth. He doesn't know." The front door opened, and the officers froze. Through the doorway, Marcus saw his mother enter, carrying grocery bags. "Marcus," she called. "Are you home?" "In here, Mom," he answered, watching the officer's demeanor instantly transform. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding as she assessed the scene, her ransacked bedroom, the officers standing over her son's wheelchair, the red mark on Marcus's cheek. "Officers," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "What's happening here?" "Just following up on some reports, Mrs. Miller," Daniels replied smoothly. "Checking on your welfare." "By searching my bedroom?" she asked, setting down her groceries. Reynolds stepped forward, intimidation in his posture. "We have reason to believe there might be illegal substances in your home." Marcus caught his mother's eye, giving her an almost imperceptible nod. They had discussed this scenario. She knew what to do. "I see," Evelyn said, her shoulders slumping in apparent defeat. "Perhaps we should discuss this in the kitchen." As she led the officers away, Marcus remained in character, a helpless son unable to protect his mother. But beneath that facade, the predator was counting down to strike. Officer James Daniels had joined the Pine Grove Police Department 15 years ago with a clean record and commendations from the academy. Now, at 43, he operated like a feudal lord in his patrol zone. His thinning hair and expanding waistline belied the dangerous man beneath. Where other officers might be motivated by power or sadism, Daniels was driven by cold calculation. He had alimony payments for 2 ex-wives, gambling debts at underground poker games, and expensive tastes in watches and whiskey. His partner, Officer Thomas Reynolds, was younger, 34, with the muscular build of someone who spent more time at the gym than necessary. Reynolds had a hair-trigger temper and 3 excessive force complaints that had mysteriously disappeared from his file. Where Daniels was calculating, Reynolds was impulsive. Where Daniels was careful, Reynolds took risks. Together, they had perfected their operation over the past 3 years. Their pattern was methodical. First came reconnaissance, identifying vulnerable residents through traffic stops, wellness checks, and neighborhood complaints. The ideal targets were elderly homeowners living alone, particularly those showing signs of memory issues or confusion. Next came harassment, minor citations, noise complaints, parking violations, testing how the target responded to authority. Finally came exploitation, confiscating valuables under the guise of evidence collection, planting drugs if necessary to justify searches, taking cash that would never appear on any property receipt. 82-year-old Frank Wilson had lost his war medals and $4,000 in emergency cash. Widower Janet Klein had surrendered her late husband's coin collection after Reynolds found marijuana in her garage. The Hernandez couple had watched helplessly as their son was arrested on fabricated charges when they complained about missing jewelry. 17 victims in total over the past 2 years. None had filed formal complaints. Those who tried found themselves facing counter-accusations or intimidation. Evelyn Miller had caught their attention 3 months ago during a routine traffic stop. Daniels had noticed her new model Toyota, modest but paid for in cash according to the registration records he accessed afterward. Her neat appearance and calm demeanor suggested middle-class stability, but something about her composed responses made him curious. When he ran her background check and found no debt, no liens, and a long employment history at a financial firm, his instincts flared. "She's hiding something," he told Reynolds as they parked across from the community center where Evelyn attended weekly bridge games. "People her age don't just have no financial problems. They began their surveillance routine. Drive-bys of her property. Questioning neighbors about the strange woman and her disabled son. Creating a paper trail of minor infractions, a citation for her garbage cans being too close to the street, a warning about overgrown bushes allegedly blocking sight lines." The first direct confrontation happened at Morton's pharmacy. Evelyn was collecting her monthly prescriptions when Daniels and Reynolds entered, supposedly responding to a call about shoplifting. "Mrs. Miller," Daniels called out loudly as she waited in line. "Fancy seeing you here." The pharmacist and other customers turned to look as the officers approached. "Just picking up my medication, officer," she replied calmly, though her hand tightened slightly on her purse. "Mind if we see what you're carrying today?" Reynolds asked, gesturing to her handbag. "We've had reports of theft in this area." "Do you have a warrant, Officer Reynolds?" Evelyn asked, her voice steady. The question, perfectly reasonable but rarely asked by intimidated seniors, caused Reynolds' jaw to tighten. "We don't need a warrant for a consensual search, ma'am," Daniels interjected smoothly. "Unless you have something to hide." The implied threat hung in the air as other customers watched uncomfortably. "I believe I do have something to hide, officer," Evelyn replied. "My constitutional right to privacy." A tense silence followed before the pharmacist called Evelyn's name, breaking the standoff. As she collected her prescription and left, Daniels whispered to Reynolds, "She's perfect. Too smart for her own good." Neither noticed the man in sunglasses sitting in a parked car across the street, a high-resolution camera capturing every moment of the encounter. Marcus lowered the camera only when his mother safely drove away, his expression betraying nothing as he added these images to his growing file. The line between protector and predator can be razor-thin. Have you ever trusted someone with authority only to discover their true nature too late? Where are you watching from, and has your community ever faced similar betrayals? The day began with an unnatural stillness. A heavy fog clung to the neighborhood, obscuring the surveillance cameras Marcus had so carefully positioned. The moisture in the air carried sound differently, muffled and distorted. "They're coming tonight," Marcus told Evelyn as he checked the cloud-based backup system for their surveillance footage. She looked up from her knitting, her fingers never missing a stitch. "How can you be sure?" "The pattern is clear," Marcus replied, remaining in his wheelchair by the window. "If we run, they'll just find another target. Someone who can't defend themselves." As evening settled over the neighborhood, Marcus positioned himself in the living room while Evelyn prepared dinner as usual, their routines maintaining their cover of normalcy. The black SUV with mud-covered license plates passed by twice before darkness fell completely. When the invasion came, it was swift and overwhelming. Not 2 officers as they'd expected, but 6, a full tactical team that breached both the front and back entrances simultaneously. Marcus had only seconds to register the danger before they swarmed into the living room, weapons drawn. "Police! Don't move!" The shouts echoed through the house as officers surrounded them. Daniels and Reynolds led the operation, directing the others with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, they had secured Marcus to his wheelchair, binding his wrists to the armrests, his ankles to the footrests. Evelyn they dragged from her bedroom and tied to a dining chair in the living room. "What do you want?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. "We have nothing of value." "That's not what our sources tell us," Daniels replied, his smile cold and predatory. "We know about the money, Mrs. Miller. We know about your son's disability payments, your retirement fund, the inheritance from your sister 3 years ago." Marcus kept his expression confused and frightened, though internally he was cataloging each officer's position, assessing threats, identifying weaknesses. The situation had escalated beyond his initial calculations. 6 officers meant this was no longer a simple shakedown, This was a coordinated operation with department resources. "Search everything," Daniels ordered. "Walls, floors, furniture. These types always have hiding places." The officers tore through the house with methodical brutality. They slashed furniture cushions, pried up floorboards, emptied drawers onto the floor. The sounds of destruction echoed through the house, wood splintering, glass breaking, metal scraping against metal as they found and opened the wall safe in Evelyn's closet. "Jackpot," one officer called out, emerging with stacks of cash and a velvet pouch of jewelry. "Looks like about 30 grand here, plus some nice pieces." Another officer returned from Marcus's room with a metal lockbox they discovered beneath a false bottom in his dresser. They broke it open to reveal more cash, gold coins, and several expensive watches. "Quite the collection for a man on disability," Reynolds sneered, holding up a vintage Rolex. "Where'd you get this, cripple?" "Steal it?" "Family heirloom," Marcus replied, the lie smooth and practiced. In truth, it was payment from a past operation, untraceable and kept as emergency funds. The officers continued their pillaging, finding every cache of valuables Evelyn and Marcus had hidden throughout the house. Some were obvious, meant to be found to satisfy the thieves. Others were their genuine emergency reserves, carefully concealed but still discoverable by a thorough search. "Over 50,000 total," Daniels announced, surveying their haul spread across the coffee table. "Plus the jewelry and watches. Not bad for a night's work." "What about them?" one officer asked, nodding toward Marcus and Evelyn. "Can't leave witnesses," Reynolds replied, producing a red plastic container from outside. The sharp, acrid smell of gasoline filled the room as he began methodically splashing it across the furniture, the curtains, the carpet. "Elderly woman, disabled son, tragic house fire," Daniels explained, watching as his men continued dousing the house with accelerant. "Happens all the time. Probably fell asleep with a cigarette or left something on the stove." The smell of gasoline grew stronger as the officers moved through the house, the splash of liquid followed by their footsteps. One approached Evelyn with a syringe. "A little something to make the medical examiner think she was too sedated to escape the fire," he explained clinically, injecting the contents into her arm despite her protests. Marcus watched, his muscles straining imperceptibly against the zip ties, calculating angles, pressure points, and timing. The knife remained hidden beneath the blanket on his lap, just beyond the reach of his bound hands. "What about him?" Reynolds asked, nodding toward Marcus. "He won't need any help looking like he couldn't escape," Daniels replied with a cruel smile. "That's the beauty of targeting a cripple." As gasoline splashed around their feet, soaking into the carpet beneath them, Marcus caught his mother's increasingly drowsy gaze and gave her the slightest nod, a silent promise that this was not the end. The officers finished their work, gathering the stolen money and valuables into duffel bags. Daniels surveyed the scene one last time, then produced a lighter from his pocket. "Nothing personal," he said, flicking it open. "Just business." The flame caught instantly, racing across the gasoline-soaked carpet in bright orange tendrils. The officers retreated toward the door, their silhouettes backlit by the growing inferno. "Enjoy the warmth," Reynolds called back with a laugh as they exited, the front door slamming behind them. The fire spread with terrifying speed, consuming the curtains and climbing the walls. Black smoke began to fill the room, thick and choking. The heat intensified, the air shimmering above the flames. Marcus didn't waste a second. The moment the door closed, he flexed his wrists against the zip ties, using the technique he practiced countless times. The plastic cut into his skin, but he applied pressure at precisely the right angle, exploiting the weakness in the locking mechanism. With a sharp snap, the right restraint broke. The crackling of burning wood grew louder as he freed his other hand and reached for the knife hidden beneath his blanket. The smoke was becoming dense now, stinging his eyes and burning his lungs. He slashed through the ties binding his ankles to the wheelchair, then pushed himself toward Evelyn. Her head lolled to one side, the sedative taking effect. The fire had already reached her chair, flames licking at the wooden legs. Marcus cut through her restraints and caught her as she slumped forward. "Stay with me, Mom," he urged, lifting her from the chair. Despite his compact frame, he supported her weight with practiced strength, positioning her across his lap in the wheelchair. The living room was now a wall of flame. The heat was blistering, the smoke so thick he could barely see. The front door was blocked by fire, the hallway a tunnel of orange and black. Marcus made a split-second decision and wheeled toward the kitchen, using his body to shield Evelyn from the worst of the heat. The wheelchair moved with difficulty over debris and through puddles of burning accelerant. Twice the wheels caught on fallen furniture, forcing Marcus to rock the chair violently to free it. The smoke alarm shrieked overhead, adding to the chaos of crackling flames and splintering wood. In the kitchen, the fire had only just begun to spread. Marcus navigated to the back door, finding it locked from the outside, the officer's final precaution. Without hesitation, he positioned the wheelchair and kicked out with both legs, striking the door near the lock. The wood splintered but held. He kicked again, harder, and the door frame cracked. A third kick, and the door burst open. Cool night air rushed in, feeding the flames behind them but offering a path to escape. Marcus wheeled them onto the back porch, then down the ramp he'd installed years ago, ostensibly for his disability, actually for contingencies exactly like this. Behind them, the house was fully engulfed, windows shattering from the heat as the fire consumed everything inside. Marcus didn't slow down, pushing the wheelchair across the backyard toward the property line where a gap in the fence led to the neighboring yard. He could hear sirens in the distance, neighbors must have called the fire department. But he couldn't risk being found. The officers would be watching, waiting to confirm their deaths. Any official response would be monitored. Marcus navigated through 3 backyards before reaching the street 2 blocks over where he'd hidden an emergency vehicle, a nondescript van with tinted windows and a wheelchair lift. With practiced efficiency, he secured Evelyn in the passenger seat, collapsed the wheelchair, and stowed it in the back. As he pulled away from the curb, he caught sight of the orange glow in his rearview mirror, the column of black smoke rising into the night sky. Their home, their possessions, their carefully constructed life, all of it consumed in flames. Evelyn stirred beside him, fighting through the sedative. "Marcus," she mumbled, her voice thick and disoriented. "I'm here, Mom. We're safe." He reached across to squeeze her hand. "Rest now." He drove carefully, maintaining exactly the speed limit, taking a circuitous route to avoid main roads where police might be responding to the fire. The emergency kit in the van contained basic medical supplies, which he'd use to treat Evelyn once they reached their safe house. 20 minutes later, Marcus pulled into the garage of an anonymous suburban home on the outskirts of town, one of 3 properties he'd purchased through shell companies over the years. As the garage door closed behind them, he allowed himself a moment to process what had happened. The corrupt officers had taken everything, money, valuables, their home. They believed they'd eliminated all witnesses to their crimes. They would report back to their colleagues that the fire had claimed 2 more victims, tragic but not suspicious. What they didn't know was that Marcus had been recording everything. The cameras hidden throughout the house had uploaded to secure servers until the moment the fire destroyed them. The officers' faces, their voices, their actions, all captured and preserved. The money and valuables they'd stolen were traceable, many items secretly marked. Most importantly, what they didn't know was that Marcus and Evelyn had survived. Marcus looked at his mother, now sleeping as the sedative worked through her system. Her face was smudged with soot, her silver hair singed at the edges. The sight hardened something inside him. This was no longer about justice or exposure. This was personal. From the wheelchair-bound son to the hunters who had tried to burn them alive, the officers had made a fatal miscalculation. They thought they were eliminating a helpless victim. Instead, they had awakened a predator. As the smell of smoke and gasoline lingered on his clothes, Marcus began to plan. The officers believed they had succeeded. That illusion would be their undoing. 3 days after the fire, Captain Michael Reeves stood in the morgue, staring at two body bags. The medical examiner had just left, clipboard in hand, death certificates awaiting signatures. "It's done," Reeves said into his phone. "Two unidentified bodies, similar height and weight to our targets. Dental records conveniently destroyed in the fire. DNA analysis inconclusive due to thermal damage. Death certificates will read and Marcus Miller." In the safe house across town, Marcus ended the call and nodded to his mother, who was recovering on the couch. "We're officially dead." Captain Reeves had been Marcus's commanding officer in Afghanistan, one of the few people who knew his true capabilities. Now, as head of the county medical examiner's office, Reeves had the authority to falsify records when necessary. It wasn't the first time he'd helped Marcus disappear. "The money's moving," said, her financial expertise evident as she tracked transactions on her laptop. Despite her age and the lingering effects of the sedative, her mind remained sharp. "They've split the cash 6 ways. The jewelry and watches are being fenced through a pawn shop in Riverside." Marcus wheeled himself to the workstation he'd established in the dining room. 6 monitors displayed different data streams, surveillance footage, financial transactions, police dispatch communications, and social media accounts of all 6 officers. "Reynolds bought a new motorcycle yesterday," Marcus noted. "Daniels made a $10,000 payment to his bookie. Officer Keller paid off his daughter's entire college tuition." "Sloppy," commented. "They're not even trying to hide it. Why would they? We're dead." Marcus's voice was cold, methodical. "That's their first mistake." Over the next week, Marcus built his case with military precision. Every transaction was documented, every movement tracked. The officers' routines were mapped, their vulnerabilities identified. Marcus installed surveillance equipment near their homes, their favorite bars, their mistresses' apartments. He placed GPS trackers on their personal vehicles during night operations, moving silently through shadows in his wheelchair, the perfect disguise when needed, invisible to those who saw disability as weakness. Coordinated from the safe house, her financial expertise following the money trail. She discovered offshore accounts, property purchased under aliases, and a pattern of similar accidents dating back 5 years, elderly residents who died in fires, apparent suicides, or home invasions gone wrong. Each incident followed by sudden financial windfalls for the officers involved. "They've killed 17 people," she said, her voice trembling with controlled rage as she compiled the evidence. "And those are just the ones we can connect directly to their financial records." On day 9, the first sign of unease appeared. Officer Keller, the youngest of the group, began looking over his shoulder during routine patrols. He changed his routes home, varied his schedule, checked his vehicle before entering. Something had spooked him. Marcus watched through high-powered binoculars from a van parked 2 blocks away as Keller meticulously searched his house upon returning home. "He knows something's wrong," Marcus said into his calm link to. "He just doesn't know what." The next day, Reynolds and Daniels met at a diner outside their usual patrol area. Marcus sat 3 booths away, baseball cap pulled low, wheelchair positioned to appear non-threatening. Their conversation, captured by the directional microphone in his tablet, revealed growing paranoia. "The pawn shop owner says someone was asking questions," Reynolds hissed. "About the watches." "Impossible," Daniels replied, though his knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. "Nobody knows." "What if they didn't die in the fire?" Reynolds asked, voicing their deepest fear. "We watched the house burn to the ground," Daniels snapped. "Nobody could have survived that." But doubt had been planted. Marcus had made sure of it, strategically feeding information to criminal informants, creating whispers in the underworld about stolen merchandise, about a fire that didn't quite add up. By the end of the second week, the officers were unraveling. Captain Reeves reported that Internal Affairs had received an anonymous package containing financial records showing suspicious deposits in all 6 officers' accounts. The pawn shop owner had been arrested on unrelated charges and was offering information in exchange for leniency. Evidence from previous accidents was being re-examined. They're turning on each other, Marcus observed as he monitored their increasingly frantic communications. Reynolds had stopped answering Danielle's calls. 2 officers had withdrawn large sums and purchased plane tickets to non-extradition countries. "It's time," said, closing her laptop. The evidence was compiled, backed up on multiple servers, and sent to trusted journalists, federal authorities, and police oversight committees. The trap was set. Marcus chose the abandoned warehouse carefully, remote enough for privacy, but close enough to the city for quick access. The anonymous text message sent to all 6 officers was simple: "I have what you're looking for. Come alone or everyone sees the evidence." They arrived separately, suspicious and armed. Marcus watched on thermal imaging as they entered the building, each believing they were meeting an informant or blackmailer. Instead, they found each other, and the panic was immediate. "What the hell is this?" Daniels demanded, hand on his weapon as all 6 officers formed a defensive circle. The lights came on suddenly, bright and disorienting. On screens mounted around the warehouse, images appeared, their faces as they poured gasoline in the Miller home, their hands as they stole money and valuables, their expressions as they left an elderly woman and her disabled son to burn alive. "Gentlemen," Marcus's voice echoed through speakers as he wheeled himself into view from behind a partition. "You look surprised to see me." "Miller?" Reynolds gasped, drawing his weapon. "That's impossible." "Many things seem impossible until they happen to you," Marcus replied calmly. "Like surviving a house fire. Like documenting every crime you've committed for the past 5 years. Like ensuring that evidence reaches federal authorities if I don't check in every 6 hours." "You're bluffing," Daniels said, though sweat beaded on his forehead. "You've got nothing." In response, Marcus activated another screen showing their bank records, their communications, their previous victims. "I have everything. The only question remaining is whether you'll face justice in a courtroom or try something stupid right now." Reynolds fired first, the shot going wide as panic overtook training. The other officers followed suit, bullets ricocheting off concrete as Marcus disappeared behind a column. When he emerged, he was no longer in the wheelchair. Standing at his full height, moving with the fluid grace of a trained operative, Marcus systematically disarmed each officer with precise strikes. Bones broke, weapons clattered to the floor, and shocked recognition dawned on their faces as they realized the full extent of their miscalculation. "You're not disabled," Keller gasped, clutching his shattered wrist. "No," Marcus agreed, standing over the 6 subdued officers as sirens wailed in the distance, the federal agents he'd contacted arriving right on schedule. "But you made one critical mistake beyond that assumption." "What's that?" Daniels asked through bloodied teeth. "You hurt my mother," Marcus replied simply. "And now you'll never hurt anyone again." The federal courthouse stood imposing against the gray October sky, its marble columns and broad steps crowded with reporters, protesters, and curious onlookers. The case had captured national attention, 6 police officers charged with multiple counts of murder, attempted murder, robbery, corruption, and civil rights violations. Inside courtroom 4B, Marcus sat in the witness box, his wheelchair nowhere in sight. He wore a tailored navy suit that accentuated his military bearing. The defense attorneys had objected strenuously to his appearance, arguing that he had misrepresented his disability to gain sympathy from the jury. The judge had overruled them. Mr. Miller, the prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Diane Chen, approached the stand. "Please state your full name and former occupation for the record." "Marcus James Miller. Former Special Operations, United States Army. Specialized in intelligence gathering and counterterrorism." In the defendant's section, Officer Daniels leaned forward, his face paling as recognition dawned. Reynolds whispered urgently to his attorney, who shook his head in disbelief. "And can you explain to the court why you maintained the appearance of being wheelchair-bound for the past 3 years?" Chen asked. "After sustaining injuries during my final deployment, I was recruited for a classified domestic operation investigating police corruption in multiple jurisdictions. My disability was initially genuine but became a cover as I recovered. The wheelchair provided the perfect disguise. People underestimate, overlook, or dismiss those they perceive as disabled. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The defendant's attorneys huddled together in frantic consultation. "Your Honor," the lead defense attorney stood. "We request an immediate mistrial. The witness has just admitted to being a government agent conducting unauthorized surveillance." Judge Harriet Washington, a formidable presence with 30 years on the bench, peered over her glasses. "Your clients attempted to murder a federal operative during an authorized investigation. That makes this a federal case with enhanced penalties." Motion denied. As the trial progressed, the evidence mounted inexorably. Financial forensics experts testified about the pattern of suspicious deposits following each accident or suicide in the officer's jurisdiction. Medical examiners reviewed autopsy reports, finding consistent evidence of sedatives in victim systems, the same compound found in Evelyn Miller's blood samples taken after the fire. The surveillance footage from the Miller home played in high definition on courtroom screens, 6 officers methodically dousing a house with gasoline, stealing valuables, injecting an elderly woman with sedatives, and leaving a seemingly disabled man to burn alive. On day 7, Evelyn Miller took the stand. At 72, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her silver hair neatly styled, her voice steady as she recounted the night of the fire. "I felt the needle go in, and then everything started to blur," she testified. "The last thing I remember clearly was seeing my son's face as he cut me free from the chair they'd tied me to. The rest is just fragments, heat, smoke, being carried. I woke up in our safe house the next day." "And why did you agree to participate in this dangerous operation?" Chen asked. "Because I spent 40 years as a financial analyst. I know fraud when I see it." When Marcus identified the pattern of elderly residents dying under suspicious circumstances, followed by officers suddenly making large purchases, "I couldn't stand by and let it continue." The defense's cross-examination strategy collapsed when they attempted to portray Marcus as a rogue operative conducting illegal surveillance. The operation was fully authorized under Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. Section 242, testified Captain Michael Reeves, now revealed as Marcus's handler. "We had documented 13 suspicious deaths before the Miller operation began. The surveillance was conducted with proper federal warrants, signed by Judge Keller of the FISA Court. The most damning testimony came from Officer Keller, the youngest of the 6, who had accepted a plea deal in exchange for his cooperation. It started small, he admitted, avoiding the glares of his former colleagues. Traffic stops where we'd find cash and keep it. Then it escalated to targeting elderly residents, especially those who lived alone or seemed confused. Daniels would identify the targets, Reynolds would create the plan, and we'd all participate in what they called retirement fund withdrawals." "And how many people died during these operations?" Chen asked. 17 that I know of," Keller replied, his voice barely audible. "The Millers would have been 18 and 19. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with their verdict, guilty on all counts for all 6 officers. At the sentencing hearing, Judge Washington addressed each defendant individually. "You were entrusted with protecting the most vulnerable members of society," she told Daniels. "Instead, you preyed upon them with calculated cruelty. You betrayed your oath, your badge, and basic human decency." She sentenced Daniels and Reynolds to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The remaining officers received sentences ranging from 25 to 40 years. As the officers were led away in shackles, Daniels turned toward Marcus. "You set us up," he spat. "You were never helpless." "No," Marcus replied calmly. "I wasn't. But your victims were. The elderly couples whose life savings you stole. The widows you terrorized. The disabled veterans you targeted because you thought they couldn't fight back." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed as Marcus and Evelyn emerged into the sunlight. The questions came rapid fire. Will you continue working undercover operations? Are there more corrupt officers being investigated? Do you regret using your disability as a cover? Marcus raised a hand for silence. Today isn't about me or my methods. It's about justice for 17 families who lost loved ones to corruption and greed. It's about accountability for those who abused their power. He placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. And it's about remembering that appearances can be deceiving. The officers saw what they expected to see: weakness, vulnerability, easy targets. They never considered that sometimes, the hunted become the hunters. As they walked down the courthouse steps together, neither Marcus nor Evelyn looked back at the building where justice had finally been served. Their focus was forward, toward healing, toward rebuilding, and toward ensuring that what happened to them would never happen to anyone else. 6 months after the trial, Marcus stood on the porch of a modest lakeside cabin, watching the sunrise reflect off the water. The property, purchased under his real name with compensation funds from the federal government, represented a fresh start: no pretenses, no covers, no wheelchairs kept for appearances. "Your transport will be here in an hour," Evelyn said, joining him with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. At 73, she had recovered fully from the trauma of the fire, though she still startled at certain sounds: the hiss of gas stoves, the crackle of campfires. "You sure you'll be all right here alone?" Marcus asked, accepting the coffee. "I won't be alone," she replied with a small smile. 3 neighbors have already invited me to book clubs, the community center has a financial literacy program that needs volunteers, and Captain Reeves checks in twice a week." She patted his arm. "Go do what you need to do. I'll be fine." Marcus nodded, sipping his coffee in comfortable silence. His reinstatement to active duty had come with a promotion and a specialized assignment, training federal agents to identify and investigate corruption within law enforcement agencies. His experience had proven invaluable in developing new protocols for internal oversight. Across the country, the ripple effects of the case continued to spread. The trial had sparked a congressional inquiry into police corruption nationwide. Body camera requirements had been strengthened, with penalties for deactivation. Civilian review boards had been granted greater authority. Most significantly, a new federal task force had been established specifically to investigate crimes against elderly and disabled citizens. In Pine Grove, the community had undergone its own reckoning. The police department had been placed under state oversight, with half its officers replaced. The new chief, a reform-minded woman with a background in community policing, had instituted mandatory ethics training and psychological evaluations. Citizens who had previously been afraid to report police misconduct now had multiple channels to voice concerns. The families of the 17 victims had received formal apologies and financial settlements, though nothing could truly compensate for their losses. A memorial garden had been planted in the city park, with 17 trees representing each life cut short by corruption and greed. As Marcus packed his duffel bag later that morning, he paused at the framed newspaper headline on his wall: "Justice served, corrupt officers sentenced in landmark case." Below it was a smaller frame containing a single wheelchair wheel, a reminder of the disguise that had both protected him and nearly cost him his life. The military transport arrived precisely on schedule. Marcus embraced his mother one last time before shouldering his bag. "Remember what we learned," Evelyn said softly. "Appearances deceive. Patience prevails. And justice always finds a way," Marcus finished with a smile. As the transport pulled away, he didn't look back. His mission here was complete. New challenges awaited, new corruptions to uncover, new injustices to right. The wheelchair was gone, but the lessons it had taught him remained. Sometimes strength lies in appearing weak, sometimes power comes from being underestimated, and sometimes justice wears a disguise. Sometimes justice wears a disguise. Would you have had the patience and discipline to wait for the perfect moment like Marcus did, or would you have revealed your hand sooner? Drop a comment below with what you would have done differently, and subscribe to hear more stories of extraordinary courage hiding in plain sight.